Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. It is time for our monthly edition of What's New at Ancestry. This is for September 2019. If you've never joined us for a What's New episode before, the quick rundown is we're going to talk about events, we're going to talk about some new updates to our product features on the Ancestry website, and then we'll wrap it up with the new content or genealogical records that have been published on the Ancestry site since we last spoke. So let's dive in. We're going to get started with events. The conference season has pretty much wound down for the year at a national level. However, for the first time, Roots Tech has decided to go international. And so from October 24th to October 26th, Roots Tech London will be happening. Ancestry will be there. Yours truly will be there, giving some talks and some booth demos in the exhibit hall. Of course, there they call booths stalls. I'm excited to be there and to meet those of you who are some of our international customers and maybe some of our US customers who might be interested in coming to join us. You can go to rootstech.org to learn more about that particular conference if you are interested. Of course, then the conference season kicks off in Salt Lake next February, Salt Lake City, February 26th through the 29th, and that's 2020 with Roots Tech here in Salt Lake City. It is, of course, the largest genealogical conference in the world currently, and they do an amazing job. This will be the 10th anniversary, so I have a sneaking suspicion they're going to pull out all the stops, and you never know who's going to show up to keynote. I do know that there will be some amazing classes and speakers teaching all the things that they can about family history, how to get the most out of the products that you use, how to break through some of those brick walls, lots of really great networking opportunities, and a little bit of fun as well. Ancestry, of course, will be there. I will be there. And the only reason I'm telling you about this now, twofold. One is that in just a couple of weeks, they're going to open up registration for that conference. And that also means that people are going to start thinking about hotels. So if you're coming in from out of town and think you might be coming to attend Roots Tech in February, at the end of February, I would highly recommend that you get your hotel reservations at that conference rate as soon as possible if you want to stay right there in the block or two vicinity of the convention center. So that's February 26th through the 29th here in Salt Lake City. Then the next conference is also in Salt Lake City. That's the National Genealogical Society's annual conference. It will be held the 20th through the 23rd of May. And this is the last year that this conference will be held independently because there was some big news announced at the Federation of Genealogical Societies annual conference in Washington, D.C. just a couple of weeks ago, and that is that FGS and NGS are merging. So those two entities are merging, the Federation of Genealogical Societies and the National Genealogical Society, to form one new entity. And in 2020, they will both have their independent conferences, but starting in 2021, they will have a joint or combined conference or a singular conference because there will only be one organization going forward. So 20th through the 23rd of May in Salt Lake City, and then FGS will hold their conference the 2nd through the 5th of September in Kansas City, Missouri. So telling you about those things now because I know a lot of you as we head into the back quarter of the year are planning your budgets for next year and your vacations and your travel time, and so I just want to make sure you have these on your calendar so that you can consider these as an option for that time. Now, of course, there are always local conferences, local genealogical societies, libraries, archives. They all host different kinds of events. So if you can't come to one of the national conferences, by all means, check with your local genealogical society and see what's going on. I know, for example, I am actually doing a speaking tour through Long Island and the Bronx at the beginning of October, so in just a few weeks, with several of the local societies there. And so if you live in that area, I'd love to have you join me. You can go to my website, cristacowan.com. You'll see my full schedule there with the events that I'm speaking at outside of these major genealogical conferences. Okay, Let's talk about some of the new stuff or the updates happening on the Ancestry website. So we're going to start with DNA, and then we'll move on to trees, and then, of course, we'll wrap it up with content. So in the DNA space, on your DNA match list, you now have the ability to search your match list by username or by display name. So if you just click on search there, it'll pop down these little search fields, and you can see here you can search by match name. And so that lets you search by their display name or their username, whatever they've chosen to go by. This will also search tests that are managed by other people. It'll search their username as well. As always, you can, of course, search by surnames in your trees or birth locations in your trees. Those haven't changed. Those have always been there. So that's a fun new feature that I've already taken advantage of to make some interesting discoveries deep in that ever-growing list of my DNA matches. And then just another little thing here on this same page, we have the return of the sort. So when we created the groups and filters, we didn't think that you would need to sort by date or by relationship. The default sort, of course, is by relationship, and then when you sorted by your new matches, it automatically sorted it by date. But some of you want to sort some of your groups by date or some other things, and so we returned the sort, and you now have the ability to do that. We put that right back in the original spot there on the left, but for those of you who didn't know about that or hadn't used that before, it did slide those groups and filters over just a smidge, so make sure you don't click on the wrong thing. Okay, let's talk about through lines for just a minute. So we now have added a feature in your through lines to filter by maternal ancestors or paternal ancestors. So you've always been able to view your linked tree ancestors or your potential ancestors, and now we can have you look at them by maternal or paternal. These through lines for most people go all the way up through 5th great-grandparents. Of course, that's dependent upon the size of your tree and the size of the trees of your matches and how many we can figure out elsewise. But so for some of us, that's a lot, right? You have 2 parents and 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents, and that number just doubles with every generation. And so by the time you get to 5th great-grandparents, that's a lot of scrolling. So being able to filter by maternal or paternal just basically cuts the scrolling in half if you know you're looking for something specific. And again, that was based on some user feedback from you. That was something that you wanted to be able to do, and so we have implemented that. One more thing in through lines here, we've got a new evaluation tool. You may have seen this. When you are viewing through lines, if something is in a solid white box, that means it came from your tree. So if I was to click on Samuel Jones here or Alfred Jones or any of them, that would take me directly to my tree because that's where that information is coming from. But anything that is in a dotted box comes from someone else's tree. Now here's the challenge is it could have come from your DNA matches tree. If you keep going down this line, Mary and then Ralph, and then further down the line, you would run into one of my DNA matches. And we always check your matches tree first to see if that's where if the information is available there to make the path to the common ancestor. But if it's not, we also check the other 100 million trees available on Ancestry. And so we've now given you the ability to click this little evaluate button. And what that does is it pops open a side panel. This side panel should become very familiar to all of you. We have side panels in through lines. We have side panels in the family trees. And basically what this will show you is where Ancestry got this information. So where Ancestry obtained the information that Mary Rachel Jones is the daughter of Alfred Jones, because the path from you up through William Floyd Jones and William Kelly Jones and Alfred Jones, that came out of your tree, but then how do we get back down from Alfred to Mary? And so what we're looking at is what information Ancestry has found that we think substantiates the relationship of Mary as the daughter of Alfred. And so you're going to see one or more of 3 things in this side panel. You're going to see records. So for example, if there is a 1900 census that lists an 18-year-old Mary Rachel Jones in the household of Alfred Jones with the relationship of daughter to the head of household, that's a piece of evidence that she is likely his daughter. So you'll see some records, possibly. You'll also possibly see the DNA, the tree of your DNA match. So we can show you that. If your DNA match has Mary in her tree, in this case, then we would show you that. You can click on that and go through and view that. Or if other members have a relationship between Alfred and Mary in their tree. And then, of course, we'll show you if there's records attached to that as well. So you can also now add information from this evaluate tool into your tree for further evaluation. So you could say, okay, well, I've looked at the record that popped up, and I've looked at the tree of my DNA match and the records they have attached, and I've looked at these other people who also have records attached, and I'm convinced based on the evidence that I've looked at that Mary really is the daughter of Alfred, and so I could select one of these things above, and it would add Mary to my tree. You can also still do that manually if you so choose, or you can have the system do it for you. Of course, anytime an automated process does something, you always want to go back into your tree and make sure that it connected everyone correctly and that it copied over the information in a fashion that is consistent with what you're doing in your tree already. Okay, speaking of trees, let's move over to some of the new features in trees. The big one that was released in the last few weeks was the ability to see multiple sets of parents when you're on the profile view in your family tree. Now, this is a feature that some of you may not even be aware was already sort of available. So the first few screens here, I'm going to walk through what's always been available, and then the last screen, I'm going to show you what the new thing is. And I think it's important that you have this understanding that you could always add multiple parents to an individual. So I'm on a page here, for example, for this Elizabeth Markland, and if I'm on her profile page in the tree, and if I click on Edit, and then I click on Edit Relationships, that's going to bring up a screen that looks a little bit like this. And this screen, again, this has always been here. You've always had this ability. This is where you're going to set the nature of the relationship, and you can do this between parents and children and between spouses. So for spouses, the options are married, single, divorced, widowed, partner, unknown. There's, I think, a list of 5 or 6 of them. For parent-child relationships, you can see here on your screen. The relationship options are biological, adopted, step, foster, related, guardian, private, and unknown. Now, these are, the default for all of these is always biological. So if somebody is other than a biological relation in a parent-child relationship, then you want to go in and manually change this or update it to reflect the accurate relationship. This is particularly important if you are using your family tree connected to your DNA results, because of course DNA can only follow biological lines, and so when we're using some of our automated features to help you figure out how you're related to your matches, we want to be looking at your tree data that follows those same biological lines that the DNA does. So if you know that somebody is a relation other than a biological relation, be sure to come in here to this Edit Relationship screen and make that change. Now, like I said, this screen has always been available. Again, here, this has always been available as well. On that same screen, you can add alternate parents or additional parents. So you can add additional fathers, you can add additional mothers, and there's lots of situations in life where some people may have even more than 2. And so you can add as many as you want. As far as I know, I haven't ever, I don't think I've ever added more than 3, but I imagine you can add more than that. You just need to make sure you set the nature of the relationship. Now, keep in mind that if the person is already in the tree, you just start typing their name. So, for example, I know in my family, there's some cases where a man and a woman had a bunch of children, and then the woman died, and then he married her sister or her cousin, and they raised the children and then possibly had additional children. And so what happens is that the mother, the second wife then, becomes a stepmother to those older children. And so typically she's already in my tree because she's the sister of the first wife. And so if they're already in your tree, you don't want to add them again. You just want to find them. So you type them in that find box and then click save. But if they are a whole new person in your tree, then of course you want to click that orange button there to add a new person. Now, you're going to have multiple parents. So in this example here, you've got Priscilla and Regina. So one is the adopted mother and one is the biological mother. And right now, Priscilla is the preferred parent. Now, here's the reason why we have to select, well, there's a couple of reasons. We have to select a preferred parent. The main one being that pedigree view by its nature can only show one set of parents. So a pedigree chart, that's what it is an individual and their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents and so on. And so there's not really room in that graphic construct for multiple sets of parents. And so you have to set a preferred parent in order to have it draw correctly. And so in this case, I'm going to set Priscilla is set as the preferred parent. And the way that I know that is because under Regina, it says set as preferred. As a matter of fact, I think we may have even changed this just since I built this slide deck. I think it now says mark preferred. So Priscilla is preferred because it doesn't say anything. And Regina, if you want her to be the preferred parent, you just have to click that little gray set as preferred button, and then that would make her the preferred parent. Okay, so again, all of this has always been available in Ancestry. But here's the new thing. So when you go back to the profile, the person profile page, now you're going to see under the family column on the far right-hand side, the nature of the relationship. So rather than just saying parents, you'll see now there it says biological parents above Paul and Martha on this screen. And then if you have additional parents, you'll see a new link that just says additional parent relationships. And just like the sibling relationships, it's just a drop down. So it's a toggle on or off, and you can just click it and it will drop down and show you the additional parents and then what the nature of that relationship is, if they're an adopted parent or a guardian or whatever the case may be. So that is the new feature. I had to show you all of that to show you this little link, which is the new feature, which is you can now see all parents on the screen, and you can see the nature of how you've set those relationships in that edit relationship screen. If you don't see this, it's because you probably don't have a additional set of parents or an additional mother or father assigned to an individual. So if there's nothing, that little link won't show up at all. Okay, so that's in trees. Now, a couple of things I just need to give you a quick update on. The Ancestry member profile page is still in beta. So you can still go into your member profile. You get there by just clicking on your username in the top right-hand corner of a screen when you're on the computer and go into your profile page. You can still opt in or out of the beta experience, but I encourage you to opt into the beta experience. Play around with it a little bit, get familiar with it, and if you have feedback, we would still like to hear that. You'll see a little feedback button pop up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, as long as this is still in beta. In addition to that, and connected to that, the new Ancestry Messaging Center is still being rolled out to existing users. So all new users have it. Anybody who's ever had an Ancestry account who's never used messaging has it. Anybody who is a light user of Ancestry messages should have it by now. And then those of us, myself included, those of us who are heavy users of the Ancestry Messaging Center, they saved the best for last. I don't know if that's true, but they certainly saved the most heavy users for last. And our accounts are in the process of being migrated over to the new Message Center still, and we still anticipate that it will take several weeks. I'll keep you updated on that as we go forward, and when it's complete, I'll let you know. But if you have any questions or concerns about that, by all means, post here in the comments and I will see that we can get those addressed. Okay, now we get to talk about content. So many new amazing records have come online in the last few weeks, and I'm really excited to talk about this first one. It's something that I've been talking about quite a bit for the last month or 6 weeks or so. Ancestry recently announced that we have a partnership with the Arrelson Archives. Now, here's what the Arrelson Archives is. Some of you may have seen a little brief video I did on the Ancestry Facebook page about this or on the YouTube channel. But the brief version of that is that all of the records from Germany were collected at the end of World War II by the various Allied forces as they moved in. And those records were delivered to an archive in Bad Arolsen, Germany. And that archive, and then together with the Red Cross International Tracing Service, known as the ITS, they have administered those records since the end of World War II. And those records include details about the victims of Nazi persecution and also about the survivors of Nazi persecution. And those records, anybody could write in and you could have them do a trace to see what happened to a family member or what records existed even about yourself in that particular collection of records. It's estimated that they have records for about 70 million individuals. In addition to that, the Red Cross, from the end of the war until about the early 1970s, was dealing with a pretty severe refugee crisis in Europe. And as refugees were, as survivors were released from the concentration camps, and then as refugees poured in to Germany from all over Europe, the Red Cross worked to help relocate those refugees. And so the additional records that were created over the course of the next 25, 30 years were the records that were from the Red Cross as they relocated these refugees. So Ancestry has partnered with this particular archive. They've now renamed themselves from ITS to the Arolsen Archives to put these records online. So if you have any family members, and they don't have to just be Jewish, I've been looking through these records and there are a lot of them that are not specific necessarily to just people who were of Jewish descent, then if you have family members who left Europe immediately following World War II, then you might find them in this particular collection of records. So we're doing these in zones. This is kind of an interesting thing. At the end of the war, the Allied forces broke Germany up into zones. There was the American zone, the British zone, the French zone, the Russian zone. And the records in the archive were then categorized or organized by zone. So this first set of records that Ancestry has published online is from the American zone, and we are working to publish the additional records from the other 3 zones in the coming months. So the first set of records is called the Europe Registration of Foreigners and German Persecutees from 1939 through 1947. There are about 10.1 million records in this single collection, and just really detailed records, sometimes very heart-wrenching records. But if you think about it, many of the people who lived through this experience, those who did survive, that generation is dying off. And so to be able to make these records accessible is really important, to be able to tell their stories and make sure that those stories are accessible and remembered. The next set of records in this collection from the American zone are the Africa, Asia, and Europe passenger lists of displaced persons from 1946 to 1971. And there's about 1.7 million records in this particular collection. Now, here's the thing about these 2 sets of records that I just want to make sure I highlight before I move on to some of the other new content, and that is that Ancestry has made these records and will make the other records from this partnership available through a site called ancestry.com/alwaysremember. And those records, if you use that URL to get to these particular records, you do not have to have an Ancestry subscription. You do not even have to have an Ancestry membership account. If you only have a US subscription, you can still access these records through that URL, because Ancestry has made these records accessible to anyone who wants access to them as part of a philanthropic effort to make historically significant records widely available. So again, the URL for that is ancestry.com/alwaysremember, and you can access these records if you do not have a subscription or if you only have a U.S. subscription. Now, of course, if you have a U.S. worldwide subscription, you have access to these records just through the regular search and through the card catalog and all the same familiar ways. Speaking of the card catalog, let's hop over there. If you've never joined us for a What's New episode before, you can keep up with what's new or what records are newly being published on the Ancestry website throughout the month by coming to the card catalog. And you get there by clicking on search, and it's way down here, almost to the bottom of that particular pop-down or drop-down menu. That takes you to the card catalog, which is just a listing of all the specific collections of records that Ancestry has. The default sort for that list is date added, and so you can see anything that's been newly added by just kind of scrolling down the list. We leave this little green new tag on these collections for about 90 days. You can move your mouse over it, it pops up a little card, it tells you exactly what date Ancestry published that particular set of records on. So we're going to take a look at a couple of these sets of records. If you scroll down here, you'll see those two Arrelson Archives records collections that I just spoke about that are here. And of course, there's other records. I wish we had time to talk about all of them, but specifically what I want to talk about are these Massachusetts Boston crew lists. There's this one collection here that dates from 1811 to 1921, has about 335,000 records in it. And then there's a separate database here. This is specifically for Salem and Beverly, as opposed to Boston. These are crew lists and shipping articles. They date back to 1797 and go through 1934, and there's about 215,000 records in there. So altogether, a little over 500,000 records in these two databases. And here's the thing that I just want you to consider, which is that when you're searching for family members who may have immigrated to the United States, sometimes you can't find them in a passenger list. And one of the things to consider is that maybe, particularly if they were young men traveling alone, that they signed on as crew on a particular ship in order to pay for their passage. And they may have taken a journey, a singular one-way journey, or they may have worked on the ship for 6 months or 9 months or 18 months to pay for their passage before finally disembarking in the United States at the end of their contract. And so the crew lists, and we have, Ancestry has a lot of them. You can find them by just searching for the word crew in the card catalog. They're available for lots of different ports. The ones we just published, of course, being the Massachusetts records. Okay, next set of records that I want to point out are the New York State Employment Cards and Peddler's License from 1840 to 1966. Now, it sounds like kind of a fun database, and I've spent a little bit of time going through it, and it's really interesting to me for a couple of reasons. So these records came from the New York State Archives, and you can find out where Ancestry obtained a set of records anytime you click through to view a specific database from the card catalog. If you scroll down past the search box, you're going to see source information, and then you're going to see a database description. That source information tells you where Ancestry obtained those records. So in this case, we got them from the New York State Archives, and the database description will tell you exactly what information is included in each of these two sets of records that have been combined here in this singular database. So the reason I find these records so fun and fascinating is because they're just another insight into the lives of our ancestors. We can understand a little bit more about the work that they did and the regulations or the different laws at the time that affected them and their choices of occupation, their choices about where they lived and how they lived. And so I just find that endlessly fascinating. And I wanted to highlight this particular collection again to just remind you that we get sometimes so focused on birth, marriage, and death records or census records, and we sometimes forget that there are other little collections out there that are coming online in some cases like this one, or that might still be sitting in the New York State Archives, for example, that will give us more information about our ancestors and their lives. So maybe play around with that if you had family that was living in New York State from 1840 to 1966 and see if you can find some of them with the information about their occupation. And then the last set of records that I want to talk about here in the card catalog is the Bristol, England, Church of England, baptisms, marriages, and burials. So most of you know that do English research that the country started keeping birth, marriage, and death records at a government level. They're called civil registration records in 1837. Now, of course, it took a couple decades before there was general compliance across the country. Prior to that, and then all through that same period of time, the Church of England, which is the state church there, also kept records. Now, the government wants to know about births, marriages, and deaths. The church wants to know about baptisms, marriages, and burials. Now, of course, many baptism records also record a birth date, and many burial records also record a death date. And so you have these really rich records that date back to the 1500s that give you information that might not exist in civil records and that take you back beyond those civil records. So the way that the records have been obtained by Ancestry are broken out by date and then by record type. And it's a little bit unusual if you're not familiar with it, so let me just point it out really quickly. So we have 1.9 million records here that are baptisms, marriages, and burials from 1538 to 1812. Then there was some rules that changed about the way those records were kept, and so then they were broken out. And so you'll see, for example, here we've got burials starting in 1813, going through 1994, about 250,000 of those. Baptisms from 1813 that go through 1918, and there's about 1.8 million of those. And then marriages and marriage banns, which had to be read in the church for successive Sundays before a couple could get married, from 1754 to 1935. And there's a little more than 1 million of those. So this really large collection, and of course it's broken out by the location. And Ancestry does have other collections, other similar collections for other areas of England. So if your family is from there, you can go, again, in the card catalog, just do a search for the location, or do a search for Church of England, or do a search for baptisms, and then narrow it down using the filters on the left. Lots of different ways you can access these particular record collections. Now, one of the questions that I get sometimes, and I got this question just a few weeks ago at the FGS conference I was attending, which is, why do I need to go look and see if there's something in the card catalog? Can't I just do a search on Ancestry and won't it search everything? Well, the answer is yes, you can. But when you do a search for everything, on everything, sometimes it means you've got a lot to wade through in order to see if you can find the record that you're looking for. So I use the card catalog for two reasons. One is I want to see if the record I'm looking for even exists on Ancestry, because it doesn't matter how well I craft a global search if the record I'm looking for isn't even online yet. And so I use the card catalog to see if the record I need to answer the genealogy question I have is even online. The second reason I use the card catalog is once I figure out if that record's online, I can just go straight to this database and search just these records. So if I'm only interested in, a John Smith born in 1807 in Bristol, and I'm looking for his baptism, it's going to be a lot easier to just go directly to this database to search for a baptism record than it is to wade through all the other John Smiths born in England in 1807 who show up in other types of records. And so one of the challenges that we have in family history is just really getting specific about our searches and thinking about what we're looking for and thinking about what kind of genealogy question we're trying to answer. And so it's a lot of fun to just explore, and I do that too, but when I'm getting really serious about looking for something, the card catalog is the fastest way to get there. Well, that was a lot of information today, but hopefully it was useful information, so thank you for joining us. I do want to encourage you to subscribe to the Ancestry YouTube channel. You'll be notified when new episodes of The Barefoot Genealogist are uploaded, and of course you can follow me on Instagram at Crista Cowan, and if you've got questions, you can ping me there, or you can comment on the YouTube videos here on YouTube. You can also, if you have suggestions for future episodes, you can send me an email at ask@ancestry.com with those suggestions, and I will put those on the list for consideration for calendaring when I get to that. So until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.